Okay, so this is the Bible study for Exodus chapter 33. And it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord said to Moses, Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrance to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance of their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Moses said to the Lord, You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. The Lord replied, My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. Then Moses said, Now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Then the Lord said, There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Okay, so remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And number 1 says, what did we talk about in last week's study? A, Moses came down the mountain and saw what the Israelites were doing and threw the tablets down. Yes. B, Moses confronted Aaron as to why he had led the people into such great sin. Yes. C, Moses called on the people to see who would stand with the Lord. The Levites rallied to him and they went back and forth through the camp, killing brothers and neighbors. Yes. D, Moses went back to the Lord and told the people he would try to make atonement for the people. Yes. E, God sent a plague. He did not destroy the people completely, but there were still consequences of sin. And yes, we ended with that idea, that concept, that there may be forgiveness of sin and God may not destroy us completely, but ultimately we need to understand there are still consequences of sin. And so it shouldn't be taken lightly, and we shouldn't just say, oh, don't worry, God will forgive me, because there's still consequences of sin. Number 2, What did the Lord tell Moses in 33, 1 through 6? A, leave this place and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This sounds good. He's saying, go ahead, and I'm going to fulfill this promise to you. B, I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Yes, that's true. And that's encouraging. C, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. Yes. All of this is good. D, I will not go with you. This is not good. But this is true. This is what he said. He said, go up. I'm going to fulfill my promises. I'm going to send an angel to protect you, but I'm not going to go with you. And then this is why E says, if I go with you even for a moment, I might destroy you. In other words, I don't have confidence that if I go with you, that you're not going to do something just as stupid as you just did. And if that happens, I'm going to destroy you. And so you're better off not being in my presence, because if you're going to disobey me, you're going to be destroyed by being in my presence. So this is something that I don't think we think of a lot when we're singing songs and calling for God's presence to fall in this place and that sort of thing. And that is that God's presence is a wonderful thing to have when we are in right relationship with him, and he brings peace and joy and hope and comfort, and we know that he's in control, and that's exciting and encouraging. But if we're not in right relationship with him and we're going to keep doing the things that we want to do instead of his will, his presence is a terrifying thing, because being in his presence with known intentional sin in our life, continuing to rebel against him, is going to spark his anger, and the chances are we could be destroyed. So I think we need to balance our understanding of God's presence. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be in God's presence. I think the response of Moses and his people in this text suggests that despite what God is saying, they want and need the presence of God. And so they're literally begging, mourning for this situation, asking for God to go with them. And indeed, Moses said, I'm getting ahead of myself, but Moses says, we're not going to go up without you. We can't go up without you. We need your presence. And so, unfortunately, I think a lot of people say, yeah, I might get destroyed. If I go into the church, I'm going to be struck dead. That's a sort of a worldly sentiment, where people just say, see, that's why I don't go into the presence of God. That's why I don't go where he is, because I know what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be struck dead. And so it's possible that folks who think that way have a more serious understanding of God than some of us do, who might take it lightly. But that being said, we want to express to somebody that thinks like that God may relent if you turn to him. He may not destroy you, but to those who take his presence lightly and take sin lightly, we need to say, yes, this is a possibility, and you need to take it seriously. So then F says, take off your ornaments and I will decide what to do with you. And so this is a signal of mourning. We're not going to be dressed fancy. We're not going to have all our, I think the idea here is when you're truly sad, brokenhearted, when you're truly mourning, you don't care what you look like. I mean, if you're crying, you can't pay attention to your makeup. Your makeup's just going to be done. And so don't even worry about that. Take that off, because we're not going to worry about what we look like right now. Instead, we're going to worry about who we are before God. We want to be authentic And our authenticity is showing our contrition, our mourning over what has happened. Not, we're not going to put on a face right now to try to look good. And so that that concept of I'm too brokenhearted to worry about what I look like, which happens when we're truly broken, is something that is being carried over into sort of a ritual mourning in this situation, where we are taking off our ornaments, are taking off whatever makes us look fancy and nice, is saying something to God. And hopefully it's conveying what's already in our hearts. It's not just a ritual. Number 3 says, what did the Israelites do when they heard this? It says, when they heard, verse 4, when they heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. So they responded. They didn't put on their ornaments. They were mourning. They went into mourning for this loss of the presence of God. And number 4, what do we learn in 33, 7 through 11? A, Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp. B, this sounds very casual, but isn't this the tent that God gave specific instructions to Moses about how to build? So it's funny how it says this. So Exodus clearly doesn't flow like a single book, because if it did, it would say, so the tent of meeting that God gave Moses instructions about on the mountain, now Moses is putting up that tent, and he's going to that tent and it would sort of connect these things. But it really reads like the different sections were written at different times and by even perhaps different people sometimes. And because all of a sudden it says, oh yeah, by the way, Moses used to pitch a tent outside the camp. And it doesn't refer to the fact that we've just like heard in-depth detail about this tent, what it's supposed to look like, what the pitching of it would look like, where everything would be, what it would all be made out of. And it just feels like if the same author was just writing this book in one contiguous section, there would have been more tie-ins, there would have been more connection with that. But this is almost like a news story. And oh, by the way, I'm going to tell you a different thing about this tent once it was in use. Now I'm going to tell you the story of what it looked like when Israel and Moses wanted God's presence there. And I'm going to tell you this story of from here on, this is the kind of thing they did when they went up toward Canaan, when they went up toward the promised land. See, whenever Moses went out to the tent, so this is what it was like. So forget all that now, this casual mentioning of this tent. Now we're going to find out. If I was going to write it, I would write a whole like paragraph in here tying this into what we already talked about, but I'm not writing it. So now this is the tent. We know what tent this is. What do we find out about this tent and how Moses interacted with God in this tent? It says, see, whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrance of their tents and watched Moses until he entered the tent. So this was this was an important time. Moses was going to meet with God. And so everybody sort of honored that. When they saw Moses walking, they all went to the entrance of their tent and they stood and they watched him until he was into the tent. D says, as Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. So were they going to the entrance of the tent to stand because Moses was going? No, they were going because they began to expect what was about to happen when Moses went to the tent. And that is God's presence, which we know is represented in the pillar of cloud, God's presence joins him at the tent. And now Moses is speaking with God. And so why do they go to the entrance of the tent? Because if Moses is walking toward the tent, something amazing is about to happen. And we're going to stand in reverence and participate and experience this amazing thing that's about to happen. When the people saw the pillar of cloud, they all stood and they worshiped. So now they're worshiping because God is meeting with their leader, Moses. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend, which is just an amazing statement in all of Scripture. There are so few places where we see somebody actually meeting face to face with God and speaking to him as a friend, but we know this, and we learn something about the character and nature of God and what he wants to do and how he wants to interact with his people in this, that then when Jesus walked with his disciples and walked on this earth and taught them face to face, the Lord is again speaking face to face with his people. And we find that this is a consistent piece of his character and his nature and what he desires for his relationship with his people to be like. And then it tells us, Moses would return to camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Now, I mean, it doesn't tell us that God's presence sort of stayed there. It says that God's presence came and met with Moses. But Joshua, this young aide that just showed up, by the way, in chapter 32. We didn't hear anything about him before this, but now Moses has this young aide, which is important because he plays prominently in the next thing. Ultimately, when he's one of the spies that goes in. He's ultimately the next leader of Israel, and so learning some things about him early and his tendency to stay close to the face of God, stay in the place where people would meet with God was significant. And notice in this section now, Aaron has not totally disappeared from all of the story here, I don't think, but notice in this section that we don't hear about Aaron the priest and his sons here, and their service in the tent, but we do see Joshua remaining there in this part of the story. He plays more prominently all of a sudden than Aaron. Number 5, what did Moses say to God in 33:12 through 13? You have been telling me to lead the people, but who are you sending to help me? Interesting, because the person that was supposedly going to be sent was Aaron, right? And so this is a funny thing that Moses is asking here. I know you by name and you have found favor with me. See if you are pleased with me. Tell me what you're doing. Teach me your ways. He says, say you found favor with me, that you're pleased with me. We speak face to face. I don't know what's going on here. You told me you were going to send somebody, and I don't know who that is. I don't know what's going on. And so this is a really honest conversation that he's having with God, which, if we were honest, would sometimes feel a lot like our conversations with God. I know that you said you were with me, but I don't know what you're doing. I don't understand what's going on. Can you teach me your ways? And if that's the honest conversation, I think it's good. Sometimes I think we're more angry with God than we are asking for his insight when we have those kind of conversations. How did God answer Moses according to 33:14? So in verse 14, it says, the Lord replied, my presence will go with you and give you rest. Who are you going to send with me? I'm going to go. After all this, after he wasn't going to go, now he says, I am going to go. My presence will go with you. And that should ease all of those fears, right? Number 6, Moses didn't leave it at that, though. What did Moses say to God in 33:15 and 16. If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. In other words, what Moses is saying is, we don't want the promised land. We need you. Don't give us your gifts, your promises, this stuff, but leave us. We need you, and we would rather have you than what you have to offer and to give and what you've promised. And man, that is a rare sentiment to be expressed even by the people of God, I believe. I believe the people of God often are more interested in having what God has to offer rather than his presence. I think that's what gets us into trouble a lot, is we get to worshiping the things God has to offer, or the gifts he's given us, instead of desiring to be in his presence. Then Moses says this, B, how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? In other words, the distinguishing mark of your people, that you're pleased with us, is that you're with us. And everything that means, your protection, your blessing, your care. That's how people know that we're your people and that you're pleased with us. And the answer is, he wasn't going because he knew he wasn't going to be pleased with them. And so it's true. It's a reasonable argument that people won't know you're pleased with us because you wouldn't be, probably. And then he says, if you're pleased with me, oh, I'm sorry, I went back up. C says, what else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? So the thing that Moses knew made these people special is that they were the people of God, that God's presence was with them. And he says, we don't want to be in a land flowing with milk and honey, but not have you. We need you. Your presence is what distinguishes us. So the follow-up questions to that are, what distinguishes you from other people? How do people know that you are God's treasured possession, that you are God's special people? What distinguishes you? Do people know that God's presence is with you? Or have you focused on his gifts more than him? And maybe you're up in the promised land, but you went on without him. I mean, there's only so far we can take that metaphor into our lives, because I'm not sure we'll end up in the promised land without him. But I think it's important to just consider this. How did God respond according to 33:17? And the Lord said, I will do everything you ask, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. And now he's blessing Israel, not because he's pleased with Israel, but because he's pleased with Moses. And I wonder, are people around us blessed because God is with us? And that's what should be happening, I think. Number 7, what did Moses say next according to 33:18? He didn't stop there, man. He keeps pushing. He says, now show me your glory. I want to see it all. I want to see more of you. How did God respond according to 33:19? He said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So Moses wants to see his glory, and God says, I'll pass in front of you. I'll cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. The third part says, read Genesis 32:22 through 32. Do you think God wants to talk to us this way? So Genesis 32:22 through 32 says, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called this place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So this is a text where Jacob had wrestled with God, saw God face to face. Basically, wrestled physically in this. He believed the man wouldn't tell him his name. We don't know if this was God, but Jacob believed this was God. I've wrestled with God, and this he renamed me, because, and said, "I've wrestled with God and with man, and have overcome." And so there's this sense that Jacob wrestled with God, and God appreciated that. Did not strike him dead, although God's going to have victory, by the way. And if he's not going to overpower you, fighting the battle your way, all he has to do is touch, just so you know. He doesn't have to fight with your ways of fighting. He doesn't have to wrestle that way. And I think sometimes he does choose to wrestle with us, to try to bring us along to where we need to be. And so it's just interesting how Moses speaks to God boldly, demands things of God, not in a threatening way as we think of the word demand, but just, "This is what I need. This is what I want from you." And God responded and showed him what he needed to see, and didn't strike him down, and didn't get upset with that sort of wrestling. And it seems to sort of echo this concept in Genesis when Jacob wrestled with God. And it makes us wonder, is this the kind of relationship where, if our motives are pure and what we want is to see more of God, to understand more of God, to be able to process what God is trying to do in and through us, then is this something that he recognizes that intent and respects? And so these people that have wrestled or argued almost with God, but in a way that was authentically desiring to understand him and his desire and will for our lives, then does God recognize this and bless this? And I think maybe he does. I think the evidence would suggest that if this is our motive, if we're not trying to criticize or discredit or whatever, but we're, really wrestling with God because we want to know him more, we want to see him more clearly, then he honors that. And so then I do think we can talk to God that way. And I think maybe if we cared more about our relationship with God, that maybe we would talk to him differently, not disrespectfully. I don't think any of this was disrespectful, but in a way where we say, "Okay, God, you've blessed me. We're friends. We're seeing each other eye to eye here, but I still don't understand some things. I need you to help me understand. Help me see. Help me to know you better." Do you have this kind of relationship with God where you're going to hang on until you can see him and understand him better?